Welcome back. We are reading The Evolution of Calpurnia Tate, and today we are reading chapter 13. A scientific correspondence. When a race of new plants is once pretty well established, the seed raisers do not pick out the best plants, but merely go over their seed beds and pull up the rogues, as they call the plants that deviate from the proper standard. The plant took up residence in the southern windowsill of the laboratory, and after some anxiety on my part, grabbed a firm hold on life. We inspected it several times a day, vigilant for signs of under or overwatering, too much or too little sun, spider mites, drafts, chlorosis, general malaise. Every time I found a ladybug, I rushed it to the plant to stand guard for pests, but my tiny crimson sentries always wandered off. We made detailed daily notes in the log, a crisp new marble-covered book reserved for the plant. Terrified that someone might toss the plant out in some misplaced fit of tidying up, I tacked a small warning sign beneath the flower pot. Experiment in progress. Do not mess with this plant. I mean it. Calpurnia, Virginia Tate, parentheses, Callie V, end parentheses. 12 days later, we received our first correspondence about the plant from Mr. Hoffackett. He wrote asking if we had received word from the Smithsonian. He'd put copies of the photographs in his window between the stiff bride and the naked baby lolling on a white bearskin rug. And several new customers had come into the shop to inquire after the curious pictures of the nondescript weed. Calpurnia, you are a part of this endeavor, Granddaddy said. Would you please write to Mr. Hoffackett and remind him again that it is far too soon to receive word about this? I told him repeatedly that it would be months. Nevertheless, we must cultivate enthusiasm in the layman whenever and wherever we find it. An assignment to enter into a scientific correspondence of sorts with an adult. I wrote my draft in pencil, and when I was satisfied with my efforts, I sought out Granddaddy to show it to him. I knocked on the library door, and he called out, "Enter if you must." I found him poking through one of his lizard drawers, muttering something about a missing specimen. "Calpurnia, have you seen my 5-link skink? It should be filed here between the 4-lined and the many-lined, naturally, but I seem to have misplaced it." "Oh, no, sir, I haven't. But I have written a letter back to Mr. Hoffackett, and I need you to look at it." "Mr. who?" he said, rummaging. "The photographer, you remember, in Lockhart." "Ah, yes." He waved me away, saying, "I trust you've done a fine job. Yes, go ahead and send it." "Here are the newts," he murmured. "Here are the salamanders. Where are the rest of the skinks?" I was thrilled to the marrow. I was about to run from the room when I remembered another problem. "I have no stamp, Granddaddy," I said. "Oh, here we go," he said, digging in his pocket for a coin. He gave me a dime, and I took it and ran upstairs to my room. I pulled out a new nib and my box of good glossy foolscap paper, reserved for special occasions. I arranged these items on my vanity and sat down. It wasn't a long letter, but it took me an hour to make the final copy. August 20, 1899. Dear Sir, your letter of Wednesday instant at hand. My grandfather, Captain Walter Tate, requests that I inform you that we have, as yet, received no word from the Smithsonian Institution. My grandfather, Captain Walter Tate, wishes you to know that he will send correspondence the moment he receives word. My grandfather conveys his compliments and appreciates your interest in the subject. I remain yours truly, Calpurnia, Virginia Tate, parentheses, granddaughter of Captain Walter Tate, end parentheses. I put it in a nice thick envelope and clattered down the stairs, determined to get it to the post that day. Travis and Lamar were playing cowboys and Indians on the front porch, firing pop guns at each other. I ignored their cries of, "Hey, Callie, where are you going?" and ran as fast as I could. I didn't feel like sharing, and I didn't feel like explaining. They had their own lives, And now I have mine, I thought, exulting as I ran. I made it to the post office in record time, puffing and covered in fine road dust. Mr. Grassel, our postman, stood behind the counter. There was something wrong with Mr. Grassel, but I wasn't sure what. He always made a great show of waiting on the Tates. He kowtowed to my parents when they came in. He pretended to like children, most of all the Tate children, but I could tell he really didn't. He chattered with Lula Gates's mother and handed her a parcel. I waited like a polite child. Good afternoon, Callie, Mrs. Gates said, noticing me a minute later. Is your family keeping well? Your mother is not too bothered by her headaches, I hope? Hello, Mrs. Gates, I said. We're all keeping well, thank you. And you? We are all well, thank goodness. After a few more pleasantries, her urging me to convey her respects to my mother, she left. I edged up to the counter and placed my envelope on it so that I wouldn't have to put it into Mr. Grassel's hand. His puffy palms were always sweaty. He made my skin crawl. So, Missy Tate, he said, picking it up and inspecting it. You are writing to Lockhart, I see. I want a stamp, I said, teetering on the knife edge of rudeness. He narrowed his eyes. Was I being impertinent or not? Please, sir, I added, in a finely timed second later. Mr. Grassel looked at the envelope. Going to get your picture at Mr. Hoffaget's? He often asked who you were writing to and why. Mother said it was the height of rudeness for a public servant with privileged knowledge to pry, and for once I had to agree with her. Yes, a pause, sir. Then, because I was filled with daring on this special day, I added in my sweetest little girl voice, I'm going to get my picture made. His mouth tightened. Ha! I pushed my dime across the counter at him. He took the stamp, dampened it on a small sponge, stuck it to my envelope, and with a dramatic flourish, and said, Any kind of special occasion? No, sir. He ostentatiously counted my 8-cent change and held it out so that I was forced to hold up my hand and receive it. Whole family? He said, pressing my fingers with his moist palm. What? I said. Whole family going, or just you, little lady? Why, you're a real pitcher on yourself. Excuse me, make that picture. Yes, sir, I cried as I wheeled and ran out of there, hugging the private, precious nugget of the plant to myself. I would never share that knowledge with him. You might as well tell your news to the whole town. And what if it turned out that Granddaddy was, God forbid, wrong? I couldn't bear it if he were wrong. But I couldn't bear it if other people knew and were making fun of him. I had noticed in passing that he remained well esteemed in the community due to his building of the gin and other business enterprises in decades long past. But there was sometimes a tinge of mockery of his present pursuits. I'd heard him called the professor by various semi-literate wags about town in tones that might have been termed faintly derisive. My grandfather didn't care what others thought of him, but I did. I cared. My disloyal thoughts were followed by a stout, and what if he's right? Of course he was right. He had to be right. In our time together, I'd never known him to be wrong about anything. He might misplace a 5-linked skink from time to time, and who didn't? But he was never wrong about the facts. I knew full well that the next few weeks were going to be an agony of waiting, and that leaving myself unoccupied would make things much, much worse. I resolved to dive into a frenzy of specimen collecting, science schoolwork, work of any kind, to make the time go faster. What I did not foresee was that the work would be housework. That is the end of chapter 13.